Are you watching closely? Did you spot the difference? What changed? Throughout all of human history, there's been one clear thread, and that is humans. From using weapons to signing up for war, to dying for our country in respective causes, to defend or attack, human pulls the trigger. But new weaponry, such as drones, threatens, in a big way, to change all of this. A real-time autonomous decision maker, a killer robot.
The weaponization of artificial intelligence is a serious danger. And the prospect of machines that have the capacity by themselves to select and destroy targets is creating enormous difficulties, or will create enormous difficulties, to avoid the escalation in conflict and to guarantee that international humanitarian law and human rights law are respected in the battlefields.
So what are these autonomous weapons? We have to distinguish between in-the-loop systems, where humans have control over the fire and operations, and on-the-loop systems, which commander can abort at the last minute. For instance, a drone, somebody a million miles away controlling. And then there's out of the loop. These are fully autonomous, and they may look like a drone. The real question to ask is, how can we be sure the black box is safe enough that we know who's doing what? So we imagine ourselves a new kind of weapon, one that does not wait for orders, does not sleep, doesn't fire out of panic. Or so we think. The responsibility gap is a clear, present danger talked about by Sparrow in his famous work. Scenario 1. Lethal autonomous weapon is deployed in a conflict zone, identifies a group of enemy soldiers. Under all legal requirements, they surrender. The weapon, nevertheless, eliminates all targets. Now let's take a look at scenario 2. A commander and his troops. They identify, and the commander, in this case, orders. How's the moral landscape changed between these two scenarios? Perhaps the answer here shows the danger the responsibility gap can have. When we look back in history, all of the war crimes have a clear target, identified by us. But now a code, a pre-programmed machine, something that no commander has any control over, its final decision. And we obviously can't blame the machines themselves. So what do? By all legal means, there is a lack of intent from the operator. They didn't mean for this to happen. This was not built into their code. There was no intent from other parties. Nobody could have stopped this. The soldiers surrendered. And there is a lack of direct control over the weapon itself. So why would we even bother to build these? An interesting argument is on the humanitarian appeal, that perhaps these drones are needed, morally required.
The democratic state is morally obligated to effectively defend their human rights with their limited resources. Additionally, I would argue that unmanned systems are consistent with a society's duty to avoid unnecessary risks to its combatants, a duty that sparked the recent controversy over up-armored vehicles. But these rights and corresponding duties must be weighed against other ethical considerations.
So there is a case to be made for developing and using these weapons. On a moral basis, efficiency, better consequences. And perhaps we see now that no autonomous weapon operates in a vacuum. War, after all, was chosen by humans. And so this gap is perhaps not so. That by engaging in this activity in the first place, and by developing weapons, we ourselves are blameworthy. We have voluntarily done this. There is another strategy by Leveringhouse that maybe if the humanitarian argument is correct, and autonomous weapons are a sound means to enhance compliance, just and bellow, these gaps might be acceptable. It might be ethically desirable to engage in armed conflicts in which no one can be held responsible for some of the use of force, but that fewer individuals are overall harmed. These weapons could tackle the critics by replying that if we are serious about protecting human life, we should learn to live with them. In the long run, we could train AI robots to follow the principles of war and just cause, to minimize harm. Perhaps AI can implement the distinction and proportionality principle better than humans. We could make the analogy that if more self-driving cars equals fewer accidents, then we have a moral obligation to drive self-driving cars.
Machines that have the power and the discretion to take human lives are politically unacceptable, are morally repugnant, and should be banned by international law.
There's a point in time where some people are going to say, look, we can't allow some of this technology to be exported. We can't allow even some of this equipment to be exported because we're afraid others will put them to a devious use on that. Is it even possible to draw that kind of a line, or is it's going to happen anyway?
That's a difficult line, and I'm not an expert in export control regulations. I know that our manufacturers have voiced their concern that sometimes they're too complicated and difficult to comply with. But yes, I think it is possible that if export controls aren't administered properly, it could end up providing bad people with highly technical systems that could be used against the United States. So we're not, AVSI and me personally, I'm not opposed to export regulations. It's just we'd like to see them easy to use and administered in a expedited way.
Let me just ask the survey, the rest of the panel, just quickly on that. Does anybody think that there's a possibility of controlling the export of this technology in such a way that it would not be something we'd have to be concerned about other countries using against our interest, or is that just something that can't be done? Dr. Singer?
No, it'd be like trying to control computers or trying to control automobiles. We already see 43 other countries building, buying, and using these systems and a range of non-state actors for both positive and nefarious purposes. I think the bigger question is, how do we maintain our competitiveness in this field? How do we ensure that businesses can continue to thrive so that we...
Efficiency, productivity, this is the general trend that warfare has taken. But whether or not to regulate these weapons, and whether or not a unanimous decision can come, given the severe benefits that an army will have in having AI, how do we enforce compliance? It seems that asymmetry will arise between one country that has and the rest that are now defenseless against it. The second challenge is verification. We remember now this image and this are quite visibly different. But how can we tell when something becomes autonomous? What's to say a weapon won't mask its own power? A weapon that is smarter and faster and more capable than human beings themselves. And what does victory look like with such a weapon? Is it less casualties? Is it robot versus robot conflict? How will regulation shape our decision? And does the future really hold humans in value anymore? If it is us that no longer fight and die for our country, but robots and autonomous weapons? How does our faith become impacted? And what does it mean to be a leader when you are no longer responsible for the decisions of your own army? We look back in history and see that scientists and engineers, computer scientists, have changed the way we interact with the world. But sometimes, and more often, it is the critics and philosophers that change the way we think about this.